Good morning, good afternoon, good night, my dears. Welcome to the Worldwide Podcast, Jamaica edition. How I'm hyper for this episode. I've been growing up with lots of reggae culture behind it in my background and kind of stuff. So before introducing our guest, I just want to ask, how is Guilherme? How you doing, man?
Man, I'm doing good. I missed recording so many,
Yeah, so bad, man.
just like scheduling problems and everything. But man, we're back with the Caribbean once
Woo!
again. We've
Go.
only the two countries yet, but I'm so glad we're expanding our portfolio of the Caribbean because I am such fascinated by the Caribbean culture. That's why Outer Banks is one of my favorite shows
Yeah.
because they were one of the only ones that truly explored like being on the islands, the culture,
The
and
island,
everything. So yeah, I'm excited to talk with our guest Nolen about Jamaica. How are you, Nolen? How are you
yeah.
doing?
Crux. Welcome, bro.
Wah, wah, wah. Wagwan,
Go.
big up on myself. Big up all the listeners right now, for tuning in. You're on the number one podcast in the world right now.
Woo, let's go.
Today.
Like compulsive. I love that.
Hi to those listening. I'm Nolen Phya, from Brooklyn and Queens, and a little bit of everything in between. And I'm a urban planner, a filmmaker, a visual artist, former fencer turned coach, and yeah, big brother to three little sisters. And I'm really excited to chat with y'all about some of my heritage and history of my family being from Jamaica. So let's get right to it.
100%. Oh my god, I'm so excited. Actually, first things first, we were talking a little bit about the fencing thing, and I think that's always fascinating. Like when we talk about smaller sports or sports that are not talked about enough. What even actually made you go into fencing? Was it in high school?
No, so I started fencing when I was 6 years old, actually. I was really young. And I had a few breaks in between, but I feel like at age maybe 8, 9, I started taking more seriously. But I got into fencing as a kid, like many other kids my age, because I was really into Star Wars. I don't know if you recall, but they were remaking the Star Wars when I was a younger kid. And so I felt like
Oh, the prequels.
it was just like something. Yeah, the prequels. I mean, 1 and 2, I'd say 2 and 3 were the best. 1, I don't know so much.
It is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is. But either way, they got me really into sword fighting, and that's kind of how I got into fencing. My mom, she's great. She's the person who figured it all out and found the classes and whatnot. But yeah, that's really what got me started. And I think from there, I've been fencing.
What made you continue actually fencing? Were you like still enjoying after like that fantasy? Maybe like, okay, this is kind of like Star Wars when you're 6 years old, but then when you turn like maybe 10, you're like, oh, I gotta take this seriously now. So you went from Star Wars maybe to the Pirates of the Caribbean, something like that.
Yeah, I'm sure maybe you've seen fencing a little bit, but there's very specific rules, so it's not just swinging,
going crazy.
Yeah, with your two hands.
It's very strategic, yeah, for sure.
That's no swing involved, right? You just go straight up.
Yeah, it's more poking and stabbing. Yeah. So I think that's very you realize that very quickly as a kid, but I think what I think helps you get over that is seeing like older people fence. Like I teach little kids right now, and sometimes it's hard to get them interested or engaged until you show them like what older kids are doing, because then once you've mastered maybe the rules and the technique, then it can look like something from a movie in a way, or like Pirates of the Caribbean instead of maybe Star Wars, which I also loved a lot. I love The Princess Bride too. That's another classic fencing movie.
Yeah.
Satire of
and nowadays Wednesday as well, like fencing was represented right there.
Yeah, I think that blew fencing so much, especially for the like Gen Z younger audience that maybe
for young
didn't
kids.
know much about fencing. They were like, this is cool as hell, I want to try it. I think like with combat sports as well, especially nowadays, it's also making people a little bit more interested in joining like especially BJJ. I see like now so many kids training jiu-jitsu just because of like how media is putting BJJ in their films and shows and media, and that's so cool. again with fencing as well. Not just like football and basketball and whatever, you know. It's nice to see like those other sports being like portrayed at least.
Yeah, it's crazy because talking about it, Nolan, how is how's fencing regarding the black culture? I mean, because abroad right here, like we have the point of view that fencing kind of those sports that are more, let's say, I don't want to use the wrong word, but like kind of porch and kind of stuff. And how's the black culture see this? Like, are there lots of black people doing fencing right now?
Yeah, I can answer that 100%. I think when I started, there were honestly not that many black
Yeah.
people in fencing, people of color in general. And the people that were in it were very, wealthy or well off. But I think that has changed a lot in the past 20 years since I've started the sport. In particular, I mentioned my sister. She fences for a foundation in New York that's grown a lot called the Peter Westbrook Foundation. And if you check it out, the guy who runs it is a really amazing guy. This guy, Peter Westbrook, who's this black guy from New York who's fencing in the 70s, and he won silver
Cool,
at the
man.
Olympics. And he has this foundation that gives lessons to kids for free, and like helps them pay for travel and whatnot. So through the growth of foundations like that, I think fencing has changed. It's become more diverse. And I think also the growth of like college teams has also helped that too. Fencing used to be much smaller at the college level, but I think because of how competitive schools in the United States have gotten, a lot more people have flocked to like more abstract sports like
It's pretty cool,
fencing or
man.
crew
Yeah.
or tennis. And in one way, it's maybe controversial because, I mean, schools are for learning, but in another way, it's given people like me, for sure,
Come on, giving
opportunities to go
opportunity, man.
places
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
couldn't
like an
go
entrance.
without it. Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's one of the reasons fencing has gotten more diverse and grown too, because these schools have lots of funding for it. So much so, actually, I don't know if you recall when the federal government in the United States, they were going after different colleges for giving out acceptances for kids for shady reasons. Like I think it was called Operation Something Blue, like the Target family, the family that owns a clothing brand in Target, had paid basically a bribe to officials to get their kid in, but a fencing coach was a part of that at Harvard. If you check out news articles dating back, so there's a lot of money in fencing, especially at the college
Involved.
level. Yeah.
That's
I can imagine. But I'm really glad you talked about the foundations, because I can give the example of rowing in South Africa, especially, and rowing is also like seen as a white people sport, especially in media. I think the only film that I can remember that really displayed rowing was that film of Facebook about Mark Wall, the guy from Facebook.
yeah.
Yeah.
Social network.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Social Network, exactly, with even Andrew Garfield and the other
Yeah.
guy. And it was always seen as this white people sport, but in South Africa now it's incredibly popular amongst black people and the black community, because foundations started to be funded not just by the government, but especially by individuals, guys who went to the Olympics and started their own like business in a way, but a non lucrative business to give entrance to these poor kids mainly, to give them these like accessibility of trying the sport and practicing it in South Africa, in the lakes, whatever it is. So I think
That's
yeah,
pretty cool,
foundations
man.
is definitely like a way to give entrance again
Yeah.
to these less privileged individuals.
And the same is
So
happening right now in Brazil with surfing. Back in the days, we were just seeing
yes,
white surfers right now, and right now we see some black Brazilian surfers right now winning the world championship, which is pretty cool, pretty amazing. So that's why I made this question, because right here in Brazil, like we see fencing as a white people sport, man. Like I even I kind of don't know any Brazilian, like black Brazilian fencing out there, like the only girls. And yeah, other points, like it's a girl sport right here in Brazil. Like you don't see men fencing right here. It's crazy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's definitely a sport that has a lot of support from like men and women here in the United States, but I could definitely see that perception outside the United
Yeah.
States.
Yeah.
when you see fencing, there's outfits and the rules, and you have to hold your hand up in a funny way. So people might call it
The whole
girly or
aesthetic of the
whatever.
sport.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Amazing,
And
man.
now, like diving a little bit to the urban planning as you're studying in MIT, which once you said
Yes.
that, man, and the name, I'm sorry, but as an outsider, that's like top
Yeah,
schools
bro.
that we know, of course. So that's good.
Thank you.
Congrats
Thank you.
getting
Congrats,
into
man.
that
Congrats, man.
to that course. Man, I wanted to ask you because I feel like as we're talking before the podcast, Chicago and New York are their infrastructure is completely different than the rest of the US. I feel like they have good public transportation. They have a good system that you don't really need a car to get to places. And in the contrary, you have like LA, San Francisco. I think San Francisco is a little bit better, but LA and
Hmm.
other cities like that, they're a little bit like if you don't have a car, you're like, okay, what do I do now? How do I get
Yeah.
there? It's impossible. What would be something that you'd see that needs to change, like in that side of infrastructure, especially even to help communities get to places without like
Hmm.
needing a car every day, system
Yeah,
wise?
I can definitely answer that question. First, I think you got to talk a little bit about why New York and Chicago are the way they are. I've never been to Chicago. I have an ex-girlfriend that lives there, so that's probably why. But in terms of, what I know historically, like those two cities developed, thinking about the history of the United States, the colonization started on the East Coast and then moved westward over hundreds of years. But by the time they got to Chicago, they hadn't yet developed cars yet. So developed as a city without like cars built into its planning. However, by the time you get to, LA and San Francisco really booming in the 20th century, after the post-war period or like around the New Deal era of American society, that's when the car is really like a thing that people want in their lives.
Yeah, took
And
off.
it was like, yeah, and that's why so much of those cities, I feel like, has car planning built into it. But looking back, back to Chicago and New York, what they did to make way for the car, you know, in their cases, a lot of times was take out streetcars. So if
Mhm.
you look back at old footage of like a lot of American cities, you'll see they used to have tons of streetcars running through major boulevards that are now like for cars today. And so to me,
Mm.
a big issue is like, how do we try to maybe bring that back? And it doesn't have to be with like cars that are fixed, which is really popular in Europe, but it could be with bus services or rapid
Trams.
bus transit.
I
Yeah.
always say trams are just the way to get around to places. I love trams. I think they're super beautiful in the city, the way they look and the way they travel across places.
Hmm.
But yes, it's highly like it
Yeah,
you need super planning, like
yeah,
a
it
good
demands
amount of
lots
like
of
planning to
plan.
make it work. Yeah.
Hmm.
And to build like to rebuild the whole city in order to have trams.
Yeah,
So
for
I get it's
example, we
like
were talking
very hard.
like before recording about Madison Square Garden. Like, imagine demolishing Madison Square Garden for building like a train way. Like, it
Just trams.
Those are
wouldn't
the
work.
hard choices, cities,
Mm.
not just American cities, but lots of cities that have built up around cars and all this
Yeah,
crazy infrastructure have to
sure.
make, you know. So
Yeah, and it goes with people's mentality. Some people they just like having a car and they don't want to get inside a public transport. But man,
I
especially
understand.
here in yeah, yeah, it's I mean it's their own like privacy. They have their own things. But man, I just love being in a city that's walkable, and especially talking
Yeah.
to someone who's studying urban planning. It's incredibly fascinating, especially that I'm living in Santiago, a city in South America that has better public transportations and just way better infrastructure than most cities in Europe, I would even say. So
Mm.
it's
Santiago, they
incredible
really
now to
did.
like go back to Europe and look back, especially my country in Portugal, and
It's going
say,
to be a shock,
how does
man.
a city in South America work 10 times better than a city in Europe, where like especially Americans say, oh, it's the just the best example of like public transportation working. Whereas like
Mm.
South Europe and Eastern Europe, not so much. There's a few like not examples that actually work, but still like normally those countries are not like the greatest, like Belgium and France and the Netherlands especially. So it's been quite interesting to see that comparison. But yeah,
Yeah.
and I would even ask you, like, what is like a dream urban changing, especially like in Queens or near to where you live, that you'd love to do?
Or even in Jamaica,
Mm.
like you just came back
Oh
from
yeah,
there.
yeah, or even going back to Jamaica
Yeah,
and putting your skills
What
to.
might have been
I
a
mean, in
shock,
New York
man.
City, what I would love to see in my part of Queens, especially, um, are two things really. One is I feel like they need to build some sort of new subway line or overhead um subway line that runs over Woodhaven Boulevard, which is a big like boulevard near where I live. And basically it would help connect people move north and south between Brooklyn and Queens or Queens and Queens. If you ever talk to anyone who's from Brooklyn and you ask them, do you go to Queens often? They're probably like, no, not that often. And it's even though they're really close together, it's because there's terrible transit in between each other. So much so that people in Brooklyn who want to go to certain places in Queens, they have to go into Manhattan and then loop back around into Queens
Come
a lot of
on.
the time.
And how long
So
does it take it?
it's like an hour
Wow.
normally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's a long time, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's one thing in New York City. The second thing is there's this big road called Atlantic Avenue near my house in Queens. It's like a 3, 4 lane on each side boulevard. And it was widened in the 1950s or 40s. And I would love to see them shrink it back down because it's a real divider between, you know, neighborhoods in the city, between the neighborhood south of me and the neighborhood north of me. And then there's a lot of things on one side of that road that I feel like I'd love to access. But because of this scary road, I feel like people naturally don't walk in that direction. They're like,
Mm.
oh, there's a bunch of cars and stuff. Let's walk in the other direction. But I think there's value in maybe turning it into more of like a shaded boulevard with trees or like sitting space or park space on it. In Jamaica,
Mhm.
though, oof, I could talk about urban planning all day. In Jamaica, what I think people need is uh like rapid bus transit. And I'm sure this is I know this is a thing in other parts of like Latin America, but we have like cocoa taxis in Jamaica. They're called
Jamaica.
robo taxis. But
Is that
it's
the
like,
light stuff?
Not familiar with it.
no,
Uh,
maybe like dollar cabs or route taxis.
Dollar
oh,
cabs.
I know. Oh,
Okay.
let
Yeah,
me just tell you, Nolan, they're the craziest in South Africa. Oh my god,
Yeah.
you would not imagine.
yeah.
Uh, they're the crazy, but I feel like it's a good solution, like a very cheap solution to make like transporting of people that have not much money to like get an Uber or those sorts of things, but they're crazy. Definitely.
Yeah, that's definitely the reaction I think people in Jamaica have. There's a lot of issues with safety and all that stuff, and they're not necessarily very regulated, even though it is a cool experience. And
It is, man. It
you know,
works very well right here
yeah,
to connect, suburbs.
Brazil also has. I remember João
Yeah.
telling me about it, and we saw it. And I even made a comparison.
We've
It
never
does look
been
like
to one,
the ones from
right?
South Africa. I didn't got in one, no,
All right.
but I did got in a couple in South Africa, and that was enough for
Okay.
me. I said,
Yeah.
okay, I got the experience. No more. Ubers are cheap.
Right here is insane, man. They're very fast and sometimes stopping in all of a sudden, like you're driving your car. They're just stopping in front
They
of your
stop
car
like
and you just have to turn around. It's just crazy,
uh
man.
they put little the foot on the pedal,
Yeah,
like just
yeah.
full on, not
Then
caring.
you have to predict like if they're going to break or not.
Uh, that's amazing. But yeah, so for transport, you would say like rapid buses, and what would that mean?
yeah.
Or
Like
what?
I think the route taxis are good for getting to parts on the inside of the island, but for people who maybe just need to go around the ring of the island,
Mm,
there's not that many services that are consistent, one, affordable, accessible.
Yeah.
Um, and it would be very interesting, I think, if people had some sort of service that they could take that wasn't just a route taxi to get around that the ring of the island at the very least, because
yeah.
they've built new highways um all across the edges that they could run on. So the infrastructure is there, and the reason why is because it would help people get to and from places without having to worry about delays or issues, like if the taxi drivers are on strike, which they do sometimes for the right reasons and the wrong reasons, the wrong reasons too sometimes, quite frankly. But I think in terms of people with like accessibility issues, older folks, people in a wheelchair, stuff like that, it would also make a big difference in terms of and like women and children as well. It would help them get around safer as well. So that's really it. I'm not saying we should abolish route taxis. They might kill me if they hear me.
Let them do their job so you don't get chased by them once you step foot again in Jamaica. You're already on their target list.
But I think there's a case we made that there should be some sort of bus or something. The only reason I say this is having traveled to Bermuda, which is not in the Caribbean, but it's a small island similar to Jamaica, kind of. And they have a bus service that helps you get around pretty nice, and it's not that expensive. There's only certain hours, so at certain times you have to take route taxis, but you normally see like lots of older ladies and grandpas and stuff like that who don't maybe they're scared of the route taxi and they want a more relaxed ride.
Yeah. And I mean, people might not realize, but Jamaica is big, so like having this.
Yeah, you could go longer routes. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Would be something very essential in order to transport people. It's not like Grenada is much smaller, or Curacao, those other countries that we talked here on this podcast, but Jamaica is big. And I feel like trying to build a functional infrastructure in an island is already difficult enough, transporting goods and all of those things, and especially with governments that might not be like so good. There's a little bit of corruption there. And always, so it's always that aspect that also might not make those things possible. But for sure, it's people like you that are going to make that come to life, come to fruition. So I'm really excited.
One of my a place that had a strong impact on me was Cuba, and it's like big like Jamaica, but they have like a bus system, kind of like I'm describing, where it's like pretty cheap and you can go like far distances across the island. And I think it's nice because a lot of people there, they end up not having to own a car, which it's a big expense. I mean, for them especially, because they can't import a lot of goods to fix the vehicles. So by design, they've had to build out public transit. The cars there are really cool though. When you do get in one,
yeah, bro, yeah, I see the pictures. I've never been to Cuba, but when seeing the pictures, right, it's like they're, I don't know, somewhere.
It's like you go back
in the
to
past,
to the 60s,
just
and even the whole
like
layout
the 40s, 50s.
of the cities, the whole layout of the cities. I had a little experience with that when I went to Colonia del Sacramento in Uruguay, which is also like a little Cuba, and they also have like those types of roads, like old roads, old cars, old like homes that make you like be like, wait, am I in 2023?
Yeah,
right
so
now?
colorful.
Yeah, very, very vivid colors as well. Talking about that city. So it's definitely that. Now I actually want to jump to the culture of Jamaica.
Let's go.
And first, yes. And before we jump actually to the country, I want to talk about like New York, like how Jamaican culture is portrayed there. Because Natalia, when we had our podcast, before even the podcast, she was like, oh, New York is like insanely big when it comes to Caribbean culture. We have people from all of the countries there in the Caribbean going there and building restaurants, having like dance classes as well with Jamaican dances or other Caribbean countries' dances. So I want to ask you, like, do you feel like you have a group there in New York with other Jamaicans, or how is it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the first thing about New York is it's impossible to not notice the influence of Caribbean culture on the city. Both like English speaking Caribbean culture and Spanish, and then also like Creole. Like there's multiple different Caribbean cultures. That's the first thing I feel like going on, and they each kind of blend together in different ways, and they have a lot of similarities, but then they can also be distinct and separate. So I feel like, growing up, I've always had friends that were also Jamaican, Trini, Bayesian, Dominican, Puerto Rican, Haitian, you name it. And like I think in terms of how it all fits together, certain neighborhoods I feel like fit certain demographics, but also it's very mixed in New York. And that's like kind of the beauty of it is I feel like going back to the urban planning thing, it's a place where people can meet on the streets very naturally and like have interactions without it being like forced. And like you take a walk down the street and you just see like 10 restaurants serving like empanadas or beef patties or, you know, curry, and you're like, well, I want to know about that. It looks good. There's people lined up. So the culture is just everywhere. Truly, you can't avoid it at all in New York City, no matter where you go. And there's like I said, there's different flavors and variations, but uh, you know, we all eat the same things like plantain, green bananas, lots of fish. You know, so
Yeah.
it's interesting seeing how people do those things in their different cultures. Because I lived in I'm going on a tangent now, but I lived in Washington Heights, for example. I don't know if y'all have heard or been, but it's like they call it Little DR, Little Dominican Republic, because there's just
lots of
it's like nobody
Dominicans
speaks
there.
English. Nobody speaks English.
You're in the US, but you just
Yeah,
speak
you're not in the
Spanish
United States
all day.
anymore.
The same happens in
Oh, that's
Miami,
dope.
right? Like right there in
Yeah, Miami is like one of
Yeah,
those.
with all the Cubans.
Spanish is, yeah. Oh, that's
Yeah,
crazy.
Oh, that's awesome.
I think
And
there's some statistic that like half of New Yorkers are not born in New York or in
That's
the
huge.
country, or
That's
even in the
huge.
country. They're born in a different country, and then the other
I
half
believe
are
that
like
actually. I
natives
believe
That's
or
that.
huge.
people coming from other cities. But yeah,
And when you were talking about like having like different types of restaurants and people from the outside like looking at those restaurants and wanting to try like your country's food and see your culture a little bit, I think that's, for me, it's the thing that gives me the most pleasure. And I go back to the example of South Africa in Cape Town, where you have restaurants from all countries of Africa, like food from Ethiopia, food from Eritrea, food from whatever it is. And one of my like favorite things was like every week to go to one of those different restaurants to be able to speak with those people from those countries and eat their food and see how different it is, like even from my own food in Portugal and in Europe. And it's so fulfilling, like first to meet people from those countries and to speak with them and to see a little bit of their culture, but also try their food and how different they prepare the food and how different it tastes, like the flavors, everything. So I can only imagine, like in New York, even like a New Yorker person that grew up there, was born there, like being able to experience all those different cultures. And I think that
Flavors.
in the end, that does even better to you because you know so much more about other countries and other cultures and other types of foods. So in a conversation, I think it even makes you a little bit more interesting because you're more cultured on those aspects.
Aspects.
So for sure, that's
yeah,
awesome
you
to
got to
hear.
be open to new things. You can't come to New York and not be willing to try new things.
Yeah.
And it's I've friends who've come here and lived here for a while, and I can see how it's changed them in terms of like their habits or how they act and think, and it's good to see, you know, people being more open to trying new things, always, always. And it's my favorite pleasure when people visit to take them to go eat something. That's like my first thing I do with people when they come here. Like if we're gonna show you something new, it's gonna be something that's gonna stimulate your taste in a different way
Yeah.
than they have been before. I like to give people spicy food. Like I'm waking you the fuck up. You know, you haven't tasted
Let's go.
before.
I love
So
Man,
it. It's spicy, man.
that's
Yeah,
so cool.
going back to Jamaica, man, and how is it like? Do you go there often? Do you used to go when you were a kid? How is it? How's your connection with
yeah,
Jamaica right now
I
nowadays?
I used to go. We used to go back quite often. Um, and I feel like sometimes we would go visit family and like see people we haven't seen in a long time. Sometimes we just go do like touristy stuff. Sometimes we do a mix of it. I got my Jamaican citizenship like a couple years ago officially. Um, and I've like seen where my parents or like grandparents grew up and all that and visited all that jazz. Um, but I would say in the past few years, I haven't been back since 2022 or like no 2021 actually. Summer of 2022. Yeah, the
Right,
summer of 2022.
last year.
Oh, okay. Let's hear. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I wish I could go back more. I think the ultimate goal for me, or like within my family, and we don't like maybe talk about it explicitly, but it is to find a way to own like property officially out there again, or like a house. Like we maybe have like plots of land somewhere in some deeds in the house somewhere, but there's no building there anymore. So it would be really cool to do something like that, and maybe give back to like the community where we're from. I remember when I was young, when my like family members died, one of my aunts, we went back to bury her like where my family grew up, and we got connected with like a school that was right in the area, and we, you know, sent them a huge barrel of stuff. I don't know if y'all have seen the barrels Caribbean people send back to people at home, but we packed it up with like school
No.
stuff. And okay, yeah,
Wait, like
this is an interesting Caribbean tradition. Lots
okay,
of people
please do tell.
Yeah.
I'm sure this happens to folks from other countries as well with their family in the United States, but it's a form of giving back to like your family. They have these barrels you can buy at stores. They used to be made out of like brown paper cardboard material. Now they're made out of like this blue plastic material.
Okay.
And you stuff it with all kinds of stuff like clothing, food products you can't get like easily. So for example, I've people down in Jamaica have gluten allergies, so we try to give them some snacks that they can eat. Books, sometimes electronics if we have it, and you ship that in like groups with other people, and your family gets it, and then they can do whatever they want with it. They can open it up and use the goods, or sometimes people sell the stuff to like make a profit, like if it's clothes especially. So it's a big cultural tradition, not just in Jamaica, but across the Caribbean, to send a barrel back home. A lot of people joke about
That's
it.
kind of cool. That's like just you know thinking again back on the pirates. It's kind of like a nice like thing that still makes you remember of those times, like those old times, like putting things on the barrel and then shipping
Oh
them.
yeah. Oh yeah.
So that's kind of cool. Do they go on plane or by boat?
By boat, I'm pretty sure they ship them by boat. Normally you ship the barrel to Miami, and then there's probably a company in Miami that takes it. I would love to do a documentary on the subject actually. One of my classmates at school is really interested in this topic, and we've talked a lot about it. But I mentioned to them it'd be really cool if we could like send a camera attached to the barrel so we could like see the whole
that would
see the
be
process.
amazing,
Yeah,
yeah, like what is
that would be
going on really, because it's such a black
really
box.
interesting actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Like find a way to get like a big battery in the GoPro like attached to the
imagine
barrel,
like
so
live transmission of it, like it would be
or a live stream.
Yeah, man.
in real live stream of that event.
That would be
that's quite cool. I did see a picture right now of the barrel, and I thought it was like a wooden barrel, and it's not.
It's made of plastic. He said.
It's not quite like the pirates, but it is like like a pirate barrel, you know, same exact chance.
Same concept.
Yeah, same concept.
Let's go.
Man, again you're talking about the documentary, and I wanted to bring this up, like the little documentary that you did like on Jamaica. I saw before this podcast. Was really cool.
Was watching it
really cool.
before recording. Congrats, man.
100%.
Yeah, we're going to leave on the description of the episode.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that is a little like, honestly, it's a thing I made both for like my family, but also you know, for friends and audiences outside of my family, just to capture, you know, Jamaica through my eyes and also through my family's eyes, because we go to see some of the land I described to y'all earlier, where my ancestors are buried, aunts and uncles and whatnot. And yeah, I feel like so many people go there and they only see things through the touristy lens or touristic lens. And then even then, sometimes maybe staying in an Airbnb, you're still maybe not getting that like sort of local connection. But I think through like my family, people I know down there, and like honestly just people I talk to, like those, I don't know if you all saw the scene with the two Rasta guys I met on the beach. But just talking to people and being friendly, like you can really learn a lot about the culture in a way that I think you can't by staying in these resorts they've built. And I feel like that's a big part of my whole philosophy about Jamaica, is how do we, you know, shift it away from being for the resorts and being for tourists and more towards the people that actually live there, which is it's a thing in a lot of Caribbean islands right now, that they're grappling with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because again, maybe Bahamas would be the best example. People only know, but the Bahamas for being like touristic, they don't know
Yeah.
like the culture, the community, nothing that happens there. They just know, okay, there's resorts, they seem beautiful, I want to go there. But I feel like having these pieces of media where you truly show the reality, the community, the true like culture deep down of what you can get by visiting the Bahamas or Jamaica in our case, I think it's incredibly essential to have that and super relevant. um, and more so on these like little islands in the Caribbean that I don't know nothing about, and I'd love to have more like documentaries, like those kinds of things, especially like
Mhm.
Barbados, as you had mentioned before. Like it'd be so cool to have like these little pieces of media, especially of locals who live there and grew up there, or who are from there, making them and showing the world of what those countries really are. So yeah, thank you
Showing
for
Yeah.
having
the
your own
Yeah,
Jamaican.
and showing the true face. I mean, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, when I was watching the video, like, I could feel the vibes right there. I could feel the vibes. Like, he was trying to show, like, how does it work right there, the vibes, like,
Feels
and,
genuine.
or, yeah, and regarding Jamaica, like, all those peace and love stuff, reggae and culture. Well, man, like, really, really excited to talk about it, actually. Like, how is it the feeling right there? About reggae and the culture, the peace and love stuff. How do you feel like?
Mhm.
Rastafari.
Yeah, is it like escape room for you? Like when you're in the craziness and madness right there in New York, and then we're just landing right there in Jamaica. Like how is it? How's the vibes? How's the energy? How do you feel right there?
The change
Yeah, I
from
think it
Yeah,
changes
locations.
it changes your perspective a lot. And I feel like going to the land, the place, you realize there's a lot that, especially in the West, we maybe live with and deal with every day that we don't really need in our lives. Well, it makes you think about what's important or what really matters in this
yeah,
world, the earth, the people we have around us, how we treat each other, how we treat nature, because they're there. It's so obvious when things are wrong. I saw recently there was some like rivers that were messed up, and it was, causing um waterfalls to dry out.
mm,
Really, really sad stuff. But
Mm.
yeah, going back to the nature part, it makes you just think about, yeah, what's real in life. And I feel like to the idea about Rastafarianism, a big part of it talks about respect for nature. That's why a lot of Rastafarians, they don't eat meat, they don't eat salt, or any like processed sort of goods, because they believe in treating the earth right. And that's part of it through like how we feed our bodies and feed ourselves. Um, so yeah, I feel like for me, when I'm feeling like cold, I always tell my friends at school, some of my friends, especially from like the South America, the global South, so to speak. I'm like, just just
Mm.
just think of home, think of the warmth there. And I do the same thing with Jamaica when I'm like feeling bogged down by like this super rainy weather we're having in New York City. I just think of like the moments I have out there, and then they make me feel alive and realize that there's more to life than what I'm stressing about right now.
Mm. No, it's
But
amazing to have that
background,
different
right?
change of perspective.
Yeah,
Um, and incredibly important for your personal happiness, your personal fulfillment in life, I would say. Especially in New York, I can imagine it's such a
chaos,
grind
man.
type
Yeah,
of mindset. And once you go back to Jamaica, you see that, oh, people are so happy with so little. Why am I
yeah.
stressing about making this amount of money? And at the end, I'll just be more stressed when I can just be chilled with this amount that I already have and just be happier. But it's hard to achieve that mindset when you don't have that perspective of how it is to live in other countries like the Caribbean, South America, Central America. So it must be good for you to like once you're like maybe a little bit anxiety of like, oh shit, I gotta grind now. You're super stressed, and then you
mhm.
look back to Jamaica and you're like, okay, I think I can chill. Yeah,
Yeah,
so that must be good.
the Rastafarians in particular are very useful to talk to. I feel like their whole lifestyle, like I said, is it's just very different from ours. And yeah, to them, there's no better pleasure than sitting on the beach, maybe smoking weed, eating good food. They do work hard. That's not to say they don't work hard, but working hard to what end? At the end of the day, what's most important is enjoying what God provides for us on this earth.
100%. And you had told me also like on our previous call like that Rastafari is a religion and not just like
yes, it is.
Well, it's a way of living, but it's also like a religion on its own. And I think most people they don't know about that. So how does that play out in the country and how it's actually like behaved?
Is,
like the behaviorism of people through that religion.
Well, the first thing about Rastafarianism is even though it hasn't a large representation when people think of Jamaica, not that many Jamaicans are actually Rastafarian. However, it's a religion in that it looks at the Bible and reinterprets it really. In that video I have of like the Rastas on the beach, where if you go to that scene, they're singing a psalm from the Bible actually. I forgot what psalm it is. But it's about like, all the instruments of God and whatnot. But it's a reinterpretation of the Bible that sees Black people as, or Black people specifically who were enslaved and brought to, the Americas as sort of God's lost tribe, the actual Israelites that are lost and need to find their way back to Israel, the Holy Land. And the Rastafarians, they thought Ethiopia was that land for them. Because if you read the Bible in certain ways, you could see Ethiopia as sort of the nexus of civilization. So that's really what they believe in, and they thought the Ethiopian King Haile Selassie was the reincarnation of Jesus, which some people, if you talk to Ethiopians, they might find that very controversial because he wasn't necessarily that nice in his own country. But
really,
yeah, if you look it up, he was a dictator. But the thing is, the Rastafarians, they revered him, and this goes up to some history because when Italy was fighting with Germany and whatnot in World War II and trying to colonize and carve out parts of Africa like Ethiopia, the Ethiopians managed to fight back and defend themselves. So they were never colonized in the same way that maybe countries like Nigeria was. And so the Rastafarians, they took that as a sign that, based off of things that other important religious figures or cultural figures like Marcus Garvey had said, they took that as a sign that this was, the reincarnation of Jesus. So that's like a brief summary in history. And I don't know if I did it justice, but that's kind of how
amazing, man.
functions as a religion. It really is a reaction to colonization, which I think is very fascinating, and people don't maybe give it enough credit for that.
For sure. And I'd say it's super different than like how other religions like
are made up.
Like the mindset of other religions, I would say. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for sharing that whole history part.
Yeah, I'm sorry if that was extensive, but
hell no. Love
worries,
it.
man. We are here for it, man. Come on.
I wanted to ask you this now, since we're talking about the Rastafarian culture and religion. Do you like how most times it's portrayed on media? For example, like my best example. This is so
there are a lot of stereotypes involved, man.
The first thing that comes to my mind when I think of Rastafari is, I don't know if you'll know this, but the little like shrinking head of Prisoner of Azkaban on the bus.
Oh, what?
It's such an oddly specific
that dude.
Like it's going to be a bumpy ride. It's
I know what you're talking about though. I think it's interesting. It's I definitely don't approve of the representation somehow. I feel like it's like a caricature people make of this very serious religion that's trying to say serious things. But I think part of that derives from like the hair that's so different, right? The fact that you have these guys smoking weed a lot and all the time, and they talk in a funny way. So I think it's people misinterpret that and they look past sort of the broader message and just focus in on that.
On the comedic
downside.
side of things,
On the
The comedic
downside,
side,
yeah. Yeah.
but I think in general, some of those things about Rasta are true. They are funny guys who smoke weed a lot and you can't understand them sometimes. My grandma jokes sometimes when she goes down to Jamaica and we talk to some people and she was born and raised there, like grew up there, everything. She's like, I can't understand what some of them are saying sometimes. The patois is like too thick. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. Can you is it hard for you to make like or to talk in the Jamaican English?
So for me, growing up in the United States, there's certain words that I feel like come out very easily in patois, like you can't do that, or stuff like that, or bumbakla, like that. Those are words I practice a lot. But in other cases, I feel like my parents, they didn't necessarily force me to speak that way or encourage me to, because I think, growing up in the American school system and going back to what we were talking about with Rastas and how
Yeah.
people think of them. I think they didn't want people to think that of me or think, oh, he has like a funny accent, so they won't take him seriously.
That's crazy to think about because it's like it's basically it's a language, right? It's
Yeah, it
English,
is,
but
man. It's like
it's its own
it's a
language.
variant. It's a variant of English.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's
But
crazy to
I
hear.
would say they try to teach me certain words and try to make me speak patois, but they didn't force me to at home or anything. And I think that's like it happens with a lot of American born kids who have parents from outside of this country. You want to fit in as much as possible because sometimes it's tough being here and being from somewhere else. And I'm sure that's the case in lots of other countries as well. But the United States, it's got so much
Yeah, yeah.
history.
Portugal was happening the same with me. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, Guy.
Yeah.
As,
But imagine like Portugal like Brazilian Portuguese and Brazilian from
Hmm.
Portugal, it's just like an accent. But now imagine like having like Mexican parents and not like learning Spanish even through your parents because they feel like, oh, he's got to integrate, and
Yeah.
we prefer him to have like perfect American English and not like
yeah,
Spanish with our accent from
yeah,
Spain or from Mexico.
yeah.
Yeah.
Then it just becomes hard. The more you become older, the harder it is for you to learn a language.
To go back.
So
Yeah.
and you definitely like won't have like the actual accent afterwards and all of that. But yeah, it's interesting to think about it. I understand both sides, of course, but it's crazy when I meet like someone who literally he's Mexican. I look at him and I'm like, you're Mexican, but he doesn't speak Spanish. It's just funny, but yeah,
Yeah.
I understand.
I
I truly
It's kind of sad. Like
understand.
Nolan, like I guess, like because of your roots and your family, you'd rather definitely speak your Jamaican English than the American one. But he kind of he feel like I need to speak the American one to fit, to don't suffer those stereotype stuff. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I think if I were to live in Jamaica for a while, the accent would come out more naturally.
naturally, yeah.
But
Mm.
here, sometimes I think just growing up in school, sometimes I've had this experience, like even trying to bring it out, and people look at me like, what are you saying? What are you
Talking
talking
about
about? What are you, and man, you
Yeah.
fucking white ass, like, like, stuff like
Yeah.
that. But um,
But
I
at
think it's
least,
good to be back in New York. When I'm back in New York
yeah.
and with my friends, it's much more easy to feel comfortable that way. I had a conversation actually, with a friend of mine. He's Algerian, but
okay,
he speaks Spanish and French and Arabic in addition to English. And I was
Well,
trying to practice my Espanol with him. And he got a little nervous and he's like, I only speak Spanish with certain people. Like I need to get comfortable with you speaking
yeah,
Spanish before I can come out, even
okay,
though I know it. And I feel like language works that way too. I don't know if y'all can relate it. You have to feel
definitely,
comfortable first, maybe
yeah.
before the
yeah,
language feels good.
Especially because you kind of have like a different personality even when speaking different languages. I don't know why.
bro.
Especially
That's the full, yeah,
my confidence in
yeah,
speaking sounds crazy, but my confidence in speaking English is way better than in Portuguese. Might sound crazy, but it is. I think it's because I can articulate my words better in English for some reason. Spanish is getting better actually. Now I feel like super, super like just again comfortable and confident as well speaking Spanish. But since I barely use Portuguese here, whenever I speak, I have to think a little, especially because my Portuguese is not too good. It's very like I don't want to say like street based, but it's very like informal. So whenever like I'm
Mm,
speaking with someone like I don't know who's like older and I have to speak Portuguese, I feel like I'm talking as a
I
dumbass
feel like that with my
with the
English,
vocabulary
you
that I
know, I've
use.
never studied like the things I know of English is just because of movies and TV series and games and watching American football, baseball, and basketball,
your
all
English
about the
is amazing,
culture.
though.
Yeah, and then bro, it's just like I feel like I have different personality right now
Yeah,
speaking English. Like I mean, when I go abroad, hey Joel, what's up? How's it going, man? Like I feel like I have this truly
it's
English
so
version.
interesting,
And
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
it's very great.
very, very.
Never stopped to think about it, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
For
yeah,
real, man, for real.
for
Oh,
sure, for sure.
guys, Nolan, wow, we're reaching the end of our podcast right now. It's just
Oh,
passed
already?
by
Oh
so
man.
fast, man. Like, wow. And but before finish it up, like we do a question every single episode to every guest that come to our show. And Guilherme, feel free, buddy. Green light
100%.
for you, man.
Before we go, I was talking with João just before you came in about something that I found online, but I don't know if it's true or not.
Oh,
So
sure.
you're gonna be able to tell me. But I saw that like Jamaica is very known to have like a lot of twins, like moms having like more than one baby
Mm,
at one time. And there's like a lot of people that look the same in Jamaica because of that. And then before you answer, I was thinking of like Shark Tale. I don't know if you know Shark Tale, but it's this animated movie of
yeah,
sharks. And the two Rastafarians in the movie,
They're twins.
they're the
they're
same.
twins. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
Hmm.
twins. So I
Actually,
was like,
funny
oh,
story. Yeah. So
it's
if you
true.
look at that, if you go to the little documentary thing I made, and I think I visited my family out there, and there's a scene where I go to like a red yellow house. There's like these kids, and those some of those kids are twins actually. It's funny you say
Okay.
that. Two of them are twins. Yeah, I think the brother and the sister. Um, so I don't know. I didn't know that that was a scientific thing, but definitely confirmed based off
Now looking back, it
my
makes
last
sense.
visit. They are definitely twins.
Just go ahead there. Pretty
Yeah.
cool, man.
Oh, that's so funny.
I have to research this, man. Like for real,
It's
like
kind of
the,
yeah.
the
What
country
would be
that
the reason
got
for that?
more twins in the world.
Hmm.
If Jamaica is the top one. Like wow.
Oh,
I feel like I know a lot
eh,
of Jamaicans that are single children, like they don't have any siblings. That's pretty common. Like my mom was like that, and a lot of my friends are like that. But the twins is a new perspective.
Okay.
oh. And just before I ask you the question, just one thing: what what do you miss more about Jamaica? Like, especially when you in New York. I mean, you already talked a little bit about this, but the thing that comes to your mind first of like, damn, I wish I could do that thing right now here in New York. What would be the thing?
What I wish, what I miss the most is the moisture in the air. Something about
Mm,
being in a tropical place,
Yeah.
it affects everything from the way your skin feels to your energy to the way food tastes, like the fruit and the way it grows as well. You know, the fruit tastes so different out there. So yeah, the moisture and just it makes you really, really, really feel alive in a way that I think sometimes in places like the Northeast, it gets very cold and dry and wet. I think it can really take away literally your life force if you're not
mm,
careful.
that's dope. Yeah, you feel more alive,
Oh,
I'd say, because you feel more in a
Hmm.
way when you have like that type of climate. Um,
Hmm. You
yeah,
breathe
man.
better.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Uh, now ending our podcast, I'm going to ask you,
oh,
what is the thing that makes you the most proud about being from Jamaica? What would you say?
Oh,
that's a
Big
deep one,
most
question.
man.
proud.
Yeah.
What makes me most proud is our culture. You know, Jamaica's slogan is out of many, one people. And we have 3 million people that probably live on the island, yet our impact on the world is so, I don't know, large sometimes when you think about it, from music to language to like clothing and fashion to
Mm,
maybe people in positions of power. Like if Kamala Harris, I know I'm not a supporter of her necessarily, but her family
She's
is
funny though.
Jamaican. Yeah, she is
She's
funny.
always high, but she's funny.
We did it, Joe. I love that reaction. But yeah, like, or Colin Powell, that was another famous Jamaican. I don't necessarily like him. He was a war criminal, but all this aside, he was Jamaican.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of that, I'm very proud to represent that and be part of that. Because I think there is something definitely different about the island that creates like all these creative and talented people.
100%.
That's pretty cool.
I'm glad you touched on the influence topic, because we do not realize it, but Jamaica, yes, it's a big island, but it's not like as big as, let's call it like China or whatever it is, but it still has this crazy influence over the world. Again, even with the Rastafari culture, just everybody knows about it. They may not know like deeply what it means, but they know about it. They know the style, the fashion. We didn't even talk about it, but the fashion. So vivid colors, like just the clothes, how they look. Like also a little bit of that pura vida, as like Costa Rica also has, of like just chill and just be good, and just chill and you'll be good type of thing. So I'm glad you talked about that for sure.
Yeah. People forget that it's like the United States. It's a melting pot, but of many different and very specific cultures. You got Black people, indigenous people, and then later on you have Chinese and Indian people coming into the mix too, and they all come together and create something that's really different, I think, from what you see in any other place in the world. And going back to what I said, out of many one people, they're very intentional about letting anyone into the culture so long as you have respect for it.
Wow,
amazing.
That's pretty cool. Yeah,
Nolen.
Nolan, bro, thank you so much for accepting the invitation one more time, for being part of the podcast. It was one of the best episodes we had like so far right here. Thank you so much, buddy.
Yeah, thank y'all. If y'all need any more Caribbean folks to come through,
100%.
Oh yeah,
ring them up, bring them
it's
right
gonna be
up.
needed right here,
I
man.
got all the islands, collect them like Thanos Infinity Stones.
Let's increase our portfolio. Let's go. I love
Like,
that. And just to give you also some more props, I was just going through your again, speaking of portfolio, your photography portfolio of like you representing the Black community in New York, and it's fucking amazing. So
dope, man.
props to that.
You.
Props to that. I was just checking.
Congrats, buddy.
Really, really, as a photographer and a videographer myself, the best things to capture is truly how people behave in different cultures. When I was in Paraguay and I took my photos, I always look to frame like the different things that would happen there that I didn't even see in other countries in South America. They had something called mate, which is how they processed like herbs into a tea. And just the process of that, like on the streets, was super fascinating. So I just was trying to focus just on showing that, because it's something that I know people don't know about outside of Paraguay. So and you do that with your photos here as well, as I'm saying, like portraying that like Black culture in New York. So yeah, props to that for sure.
Yeah, can I make an extra question like just come up on my mind right here because of our listeners?
Yeah,
it's gonna kill me like right now, bro. How big is Bob Marley right there? How people see Bob Marley there inside the country? Because outside right here, like I mean, I'm really into music. I'm diehard fan of music and diehard fan of reggae. So for me, he's huge. Like he's a god. But how people, like normal people that are not too into reggae right there, how do they see Bob Marley?
I think in Jamaica he's still a big deal, big influence, and I think what he represents maybe and what his family represents more than his actual music. I speak to a lot of younger people, and like if you put on Bob Marley, they're like, "Bro, turn that off. What are you doing? Like, stop with the fuckery." But I think in terms of the respect, like what he represents, and going back to Rastafarianism and what it represents for Black people too, I think people take him a big deal still to this day in Jamaica. It's not hard to go a couple steps and not see like a mural or some sort of icon imagery of him everywhere.
For sure. Amazing to hear. So yeah, listeners, we've come to an end. Thank you so much for reaching to this point, and of course, Nolen, for giving us like this amazing perspective of Jamaica and just the culture in itself. It was awesome to hear you talk about all of that. And be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Podcast WWP. Nolen's website, which we'll link, and his Instagram, also documentary, so you guys can check out the true reality of Jamaican culture. And do not forget to leave us a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, it's very important for us, guys.
Tell us what you thought.
Don't forget review
episode. And we'll see you guys next week with a brand new episode. Bye-bye.
You, my dears. Bye-bye.